Hello, my name's Stephen Ball and I'm going to be taking you through today's Developer Skill Sprint where we're going to be looking at using the Database Explorer with FireDAC. So many of you will have been aware of the Database Explorer if you've been using the RAD tools for a while. Been a great way to be able to quickly drag a database connection onto your application and then add connections to different tables. We're going to be looking at some of the enhancements that have been added with RAD Studio XE6 to the Database Explorer, and how a big part of that actually is FireDAC as well, which means now we have the great speed and productivity that we've been used to with the Database Explorer for a long time, but now leveraged by FireDAC as well, which is obviously the #1 database component set to be using across multiple platforms. Now, if you've not been on a skill sprint before, hope you're sitting ready, pen and paper, ready to go. We're going to be shooting through pretty quickly over the next 20 minutes just on this one topic area, and we'll have a live Q&A at the end. If you do want to ask questions as we go, then please feel free to use the chat window on the GoToWebinar, and we'll be able to field those as we go and also at the end. So, the Data Explorer, what is it? Well, it's a window in the IDE. It's in the project's project manager, and it's a great way of being able to define up database connections, be able to rapidly connect to those in a new project, and how you can quickly also add a link to a specific table of data and get ready to use it. So we'll see that in action as we go through and do some demos. Now in XE6, FireDAC has been added as a new component set that's easy to work with through the Data Explorer. This obviously expands on top of the DB Express components that have been there for a while now. And also with the FireDAC components, there's some enhanced capabilities that we'll see as we go through the demo, specifically making it a lot easier to work with the components that are put down. Simple things where in the past it's always added a table if you drag the table on. Now it actually acts a query, selecting everything from the table, so it's a lot easier and quicker to be able to modify that query, because most of the time you actually want to run a query on the table rather than just show the contents of the table. So it really does make it a lot easier to work with, and a lot more of a compelling reason to have your data components set up and ready to go. Now, talking of setting up database components, and one of the things that FireDAC has with it is the ini file that you can deploy with your applications that FireDAC will pick up, and you can either set it to pick it up automatically or from a single line of code tell it to pull in those connection details, and that can define out where your database is for the application that you're running. So very, very powerful way to be able to dynamically set where your database is for each application that deploys out. And we'll have a quick coverage of that as well, because if you are setting up and using it through Database Explorer, it makes sense to kind of use it with your application as well. Okay, so let's get into the code. Okay, so here we are in the IDE. I'm just going to go File, New, and just create a VCL Forms application here. It could be any application, it really doesn't matter. Now, in the project manager, you can see, I'll just make this a little bit bigger. You can see here there's a number of tabs. One of them is the Data Explorer. So if we just go and choose that, you can also just under View here, just go to Data Explorer if you want to find that as well. So in here we can see we've got FireDAC, we've also got DB Express. There's a number of default connections that are added there for you. One of those is the Employee Samples database. So the first thing we can do is we can actually just go here, right click on this and modify, and that brings up the connection editor. So we can then make sure that we are at the correct location. We can test to see if this connects okay. The defaults are all in there ready to use. We can run some SQL script against this here just to check. So kind of select style from employee, and we can see that's worked. It's kind of provided some data back. So that allows us just to test the connection, make sure everything is set up and ready and okay. Now if we hit OK from here, we can now literally just go ahead and say, let's maybe take the employee table, let's just drag it onto our form here. And what that has done is it's now added to our application the FD connection, all configured, ready to go, using the configuration of the Data Explorer. But also, traditionally, it would add on a table, which is great, pointing at the employees table, but not particularly useful. Now, for those eagle-eyed of you watching, you can see here this is actually an FD query, which is a FireDAC query. So we can now double-click on this. We can see here the query. We could do, say, maybe where employee number is less than 8, execute, see the updated query working. So we're now able to literally just define what we want immediately without having to replace the table component with a query and so on. So this is very, very user friendly, very rapid for getting the correct query onto our form. And obviously all the additional capabilities of FireDAC are immediately available because they're part of the components. So if we literally just now right click, bind visually, let's just add link to a new control, a string grid, and align this to client. Go ahead, activate the table. How quick was that? What have I had to do? Literally just drag and drop, connect to the component, enable it, and off we go. We've got data showing at runtime. So that's a very, very quick view of what the Data Explorer can do. So let's now dive into this a little bit deeper, configure our own connections, and see how we can update those to deploy out as well. So I'm just going to use Interbase again. I could be using any of the driver capabilities I have in here. I'm just going to use Interbase. I'm going to right click, add a new connection. First thing it's going to ask for now is the name of the connection. So I'll just call this MyDB and choose OK. And now we're taken directly into the FireDAC connection editor. And we can set up a username. So let's set up sysdba and master key as the password. And the database, we can go ahead and choose one. So I know I've got one locally on my program files. No, sorry, it's documents, Embarcadero Studio 14, samples, data, and let's choose the master SQL DB, just a different database, just to show a different connection. Obviously, we could set it up with the same file, that's not a problem. So here we have our connection set up. Obviously, anything else that we want to define, we could say that it allows to go with TCP/IP. Or if it's just local connection, we can define the dialect, we can define the different page size that we want to work with, we can define a kind of a security encryption password, and so on. So again, let's just test our connection. That's all good, so it's OK. And we can now browse the tables that exist on this database without even having to open it up anywhere else. We can browse, see what fields are in each table, what indexes are around. So we really can get in and explore each item specifically. So let's go and create a new application again. This time let's just use a FireMonkey desktop application. And here we can go ahead and let's maybe drag the customer table over this time. And again, same thing as before, we get our connection and our query, and we're now ready to go ahead and start defining through what we want to do with this query and how we want that to work. So it really is as simple as that to work with FireDAC, creating, editing new component queries. Now, with the connections, you'll notice that over here on the actual connection name, and we've got a defined name. So we can see the one that we just added has now appeared in the MyDB here as a selected option, along with the other databases that are being defined. So what this means is that we can actually define this connection, we can actually use it in multiple applications, and we can have those multiple applications reading that same configuration file to load up the database. So if we have got a reporting application and say a point of sale application and a back office management application, and we all want them to work with the same database, but they're run as individual applications within our suite, then using the database definition, we can provide the same ini file to work across all of those applications very easily. So whilst we're talking about that ini file, let's jump into DocWiki and have a look at some of the documentation that tells us a little bit about it, where we can find it and what it contains. So here I've gone into DocWiki. This is going to be one of the links a little bit later on. And firstly, just a quick note, there was an initial issue that some people have found when they've had multiple installs on the same machine. And there's this, just in the release notes, there's a file called fdfixini, which sorts out the locations of the where the actual file location is going to be for the ini file. So really quick, easy one to just download and run. But if we explore through DocWiki, and if you just search for defining connection FireDAC, you'll be able to find this page here, and it tells you the differences around the actual connection. But the key thing to note is this section here. If you're connecting using the connection defined file name, if there's not one specified, then it will check for fdconnectiondefs.ini in the application folder, and then if it can't find it, it then uses this HKey current user, software Embarcadero, FireDAC, connection defined files to find the location. By default, this is the location. So you can use this registry setting on a machine, even if you've got applications running in multiple different locations. They can all be defined to pick up the same ini file using this this key, which is built in, ready to go for you, which is very, very useful, especially on Windows. Now it goes on to talk a little bit about using the FD Manager connection defined file auto load property. Now if that's set to true, it will automatically go load it in. Otherwise, what you need to do on the FD Manager, just set the load connection defined file method for the first use. Okay, that pretty much is it. As I say, it's very easy to use, and obviously if you're using things like Oracle or Microsoft SQL, defining out the connection parameters in the ini rather than in one of those horribly long connection strings may be a little bit easier to work with. So it is quite a nice option to be able to use the ini file for connecting up and going. Obviously, just word of caution around storing your passwords in your ini files. I tend to kind of like another way to kind of fetch those in, because so they're not saved in clear text. But if you've got them in a secure location on the server, then there's no issue really around that. That's kind of the key thing really. So before we finish off, I just want to show you that also views and stored procedures, if they exist on the database that you're working on, will appear. So you can drag down a view, and here we're connecting to a different database, so we get a different FireDAC query. If we drag now departments, because we've already got a connection to that database, it will just connect directly up to that. From the point of view naming, how well are these named? This is the phone list view, this is the department table, this is the employee connection. The naming conventions now in these components is a lot nicer than it's ever been before. And beyond just being able to explore through, everything's here. We can also drop down, for example, stored procedures, and we can see here what parameters are set up. Again, you could go view these by the FD params to set those in code. But All of that is straight there and available for you from the Explorer. So it's a very quick, easy way to see what is around and how to use it. Okay, so we've had a quick look at the Database Explorer with FireDAC. We've seen how to create and modify test connections. We've seen how they add queries down now, that we can see all the details of the queries, the stored procedures, the views, how they're so nicely named. And also, this is just such a nicer experience using Data Explorer now than it ever has been before. So a few links. Obviously, if you want to play with this, please go download the trial now. embt.co/trial downloads. You'll be able to see the link there for RAD Studio XC6. Have a look at the DocWiki articles that we've mentioned. Just get into docwiki.embarcadero.com, type Data Explorer, and you'll find it was Data_Explorer. And then there's also the defining connections, and also if you're specifying specific drivers, then there's a similar concept around the drivers there, which you can see as well, how to define those up. If you are installing multiple instances, especially if you've got XE5 and XE6 installed together, then that FD fix-ini, if you need it, is there for you ready to run at the Code Central post 29812. Okay, time really now for some Q&A. Just before the Q&A, let me just mention the next section is going to be about deploying to Apache, and that's going to allow you to see how XE6 support for Apache dynamic modules, how to configure them, and which other options are available to manage HTTP services with Apache. Now that's on July 17th, that's our next session. So, time for some Q&A.
Are there plans to store passwords?
Well, so if you stored it as a hash, then you couldn't use it to connect to the database. A hash is only good for validating a password. You can't use a hash to reproduce a password, which is necessary. So it really just comes down to, basically the idea is, if you're connecting to a developer database, then yeah, store the password, that's fine. But if you're connected to a production database, you don't want to store the password in any form whatsoever.
Yeah, prompt the user. It'll, no matter what you do, just prompt the user to key in the password. If it's a process, then you'll have to do something. If it's some kind of cron job or whatever that needs. But again, that's a private process running in on your server somewhere. But if people are connecting, I use it for prototyping. I put the username and password in as I'm prototyping, and then I clear it out afterwards and either load it or prompt the user. Is there support for transactions? There is, depending on the underlying database. Most SQL databases support transactions. You do that on the, there's a transaction component with FireDAC, FD transaction, and then there's methods for starting a transaction, committing and rolling back the transaction. So take a look at the FD connection component. When Stephen was just dragging and dropping, it just did the connection and the query got created, but you just drop a transaction down, it'll get connected up to the connection, and you can go from there. I think it's SQLite that just locks the table, locks the database when somebody's doing something. I don't remember a transaction beyond that. Is it possible to connect to Oracle without the Oracle client? You need an Oracle client. I'm not sure what DevArt is doing through their ODAC. As far as I know, you need an Oracle client library somewhere.
Yeah, you do. And I've heard DevArt is doing some stuff where they're going around the the database drivers, which is cool, and that's great that that's an option for you. But FireDAC is going through the drivers. That's the recommended way of doing it.
And that's where the physical link, there's a physical link component for each driver connectivity that you might want to do. Otherwise, FireDAC gets linked in. There's no other, like in DB Express, there were other external files you needed to have and deploy. But with FireDAC, everything gets linked in. So the physical link driver, the physical link component for each database type makes that connection through the architecture to the underlying client library. What is better, manual configure or Data Explorer? It depends on what you're doing, Christian. If you're using a sort of on-the-fly creation of a database, then you can just set the path you can use the Data Explorer to drag and drop components, use the Data Explorer to create connections in the FD connections INI file, but you can also just set parameters in the FD connection component in FireDAC. You can do it in code. If you don't want to set the parameters in the Object Inspector, you have all the choices on how you want to do it, and there isn't one that's better than the other. Depends on what your needs are. If you want to carry around a FireDAC INI connection INI file and put it somewhere on a deployment machine so that the name can find it, that's fine. And then you can manage it with the FD Manager component. To let the user change, maybe they move their database to a different server, and you don't want to have to go back into your executable. So you want some way, if you're using a named connection, to be able to edit that INI file.
Does FireDAC work with DataSnap?
And the answer is yes. You can use an FD connection and connect it with DataSnap. Pavel Glavatsky did that in his C++ Mobile Day session on secure DataSnap. I will be covering this tomorrow in the Mobile Summer School as well. So yes, you can use FireDAC with DataSnap and then use the FD JSON Reflect technology to get the JSON over and to get the changes for cached updates back to the DataSnap server and back to the backend database. And Pavel Glavatsky has a blog post about it. Stephen Ball's done something, and Marco Cantu has blogged on their blogs as well. Okay. Can I use SQLite with FireMonkey mobile app target to Windows? FireMonkey, well, if it's a FireMonkey mobile app, you can talk to SQLite on mobile. You can use DataSnap to talk to SQLite running on Windows.
Yes. If you're using SQLite in a FireMonkey mobile app and you change the target to Windows, if you install the SQLite DLL on Windows, so Android and iOS already have SQLite installed on them, Windows does not, but you can get that SQLite DLL really easily for Windows. If you install that, then yes, it will work on Windows as well.
Sorry, got it. Yep, an app. Yeah, if you create a mobile app, I see, and then wants to change, either create a desktop using the same unit or set Win32 to do it. Yep, there's SQLite Win32. You can just download the DLL, go to the SQLite website, and then there's source code. I don't think there's a 64-bit Windows, but there's the instructions how to create it.
It's a Win32 Windows app. Running on even if you're running on 64-bit Windows, it's still a Win32 app, and a Win32 app is going to need the Win32 DLL.
Yeah, which you can download from the SQLite website. I'm just saying, if someone created a desktop FireMonkey app from their mobile app and then wanted to build 64-bit Windows, you've got to go and get a 64-bit DLL. But yes, absolutely. There's a downloadable DLL from the SQLite website for Win32. There was a question about can use views, and Stephen, you asked that, Scott, before Stephen got to it, but you could drag a view. It'll create an FD connection. It'll create an FD query that does a select of the view. Let's see, I was misunderstanding Ludo's question. I thought he asked about dragging and dropping components from the Data Explorer, and did it generate any code? And I said you can always write code to manipulate the params property. You want to know if any code was generated. The only code that's generated is a class declaration for the components inside of the form class. Any other code you would want generated is you can go to the Events tab in the Object Inspector and double-click on any event handlers. It'll create the event handler wrapper, and then you put whatever code you want. There are some wizards, so if you're doing certain things like building a multi-tier application, some code will get generated using the wizard. But if you're just dragging from the Data Explorer, it's just going to create the declaration for the object, and then from there, again, the event handlers, calling methods, that's in your own code.
Yeah, you don't need any code to be generated, but if you wanted to make changes beyond what it does, then you would need to write that code to customize it beyond what's required to run. So
it was by Gene. He was upgrading from FireDAC to BD applications using paradox tables. There's a BD migration utility and document. Let's see if I can find it on the doc wiki. I guess if I do BD FireDAC, and that was covered, I think, in I think it was Carrie Jensen covered some of that. But anyway, there's a, let me put the URL for you, Gene. I just searched for BDE to FireDAC migration, and you'll find the URL. It's migrating BDE applications. There's counterparts. There's a migration step-by-step. There's also a migration. I think there's a regular expression kind of thing that'll do some of the work to make changes both in your, I think it's, or maybe that was, oh, that was the AnyDAC to FireDAC. But there's a whole URL for migrating BDE applications with hints and tips for moving from BDE to FireDAC. So I put that link URL in the Q&A log. And again, FireDAC supports ODBC as well, so you an ODBC bridge. So if you've got some ODBC-based databases, you can use the FireDAC ODBC bridge, set up those connections, and then do the work.
Yeah, this works with any FireDAC connections, any database FireDAC supports. If you're using it with interbase, local interbase, or SQLite, then you can use it for mobile as well. It'll work just the same on mobile.
In FireDAC, Ray, he had talked about updates and edits like a regular table. You can, there's methods for things like append and post and edit and so on, and there's cached updates you can turn on as an option, or automatic updating. You have those choices with FireDAC, so you can check out the FireDAC documentation for all the different options. I think by default, the automatic update is turned on versus cached update. I think that's a setting that you can set on the FD query or table component if you want to cache the updates and then call the update. But let's see. Ludo's asking, execute queries, present a list impacts very slow on large data sets. We have a couple options. Ludo's asking, the sprint appeared very fast. We have a couple options if you're loading lots of data into like a list view. List view should work pretty fast, and it's meant to be very lightweight versus a list box, and scrolling through it and all of that, even with larger data sets. Of course, you can control that with your select statement. Select only what you need at a time. The other option is you can use table. Table will do a select star, but then it has a mode called live data window. So search in the DocWiki for live data window. It allows you to specify a certain number of rows from a table that you can then have fast when you're doing bidirectional movement and editing in among those set of rows. And then as you want more, it goes out and gets more. You can move the live data window. So look at the FD table help and look for live data window mode, it's called, or live data window. It's a mode type. So you have the choice there. Lou was saying, is that an FD table property? Yeah, the live data window. So FD table, live data window. You can set there's a property fetch options, and there's a row set size underneath that. And again, here's some sample code as well. So take a look at the live data window mode part of the FD table in the help. As far as FireDAC for deployment, yeah, there's a whole FireDAC help. So processing, fetching.
So FireDAC doesn't have any external DLLs it needs. It compiles everything into your application. Yeah. If you are deploying FireDAC and you want to connect to, say, Oracle, you have to have the Oracle driver installed on the machine you're deploying to. So that's the only requirement, is whatever you need to connect to that database, whatever client that driver that database needs, then your application, and that's it. There's no other external dependencies required.
And Richard and everybody, I put the URL for deploying. You see it on the screen as well. I put that in the Q&A log. Just deploying FireDAC, and there's deploying on Windows, Mac OS 10, and Linux. There's deployment on mobile. Just use it. And Peter was saying that he opens the Data Explorer and the FireDAC contains no table links or connection links. And the only thing I can think is that it's not finding the FireDAC subdirectory correctly, the FD connections INI file, where there should be. some default settings. So I don't know, Peter, if you had an older version of FireDAC on your path or not. I'll have to remember what I did. I had an issue where it was finding my exe5 instead of my exe6 FD connections INI file and FireDAC subdirectory. And I think there's a...
It says it's a mix of exe5 and exe6.
Yeah, so you probably then have two FireDAC subdirectories in your users public documents, Embarcadero, probably, let's say exe5 would be 12.0 subfolder, and then exe6 has the 14.0 subfolder. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.